Hi, Shannon. Happy Friday.
Hey Reed, happy Friday to you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's first time getting you on, and I think it's going to be a fun kind of collaborative fusion session to do a workout Friday in this case.
Workout for yes. Thanks for having me. I'm excited
Yeah,
to do this.
absolutely. I see there's already been a bit of an active chat of a lot of familiar faces that are in there at various times of the day. So yeah, it's appreciate everyone for joining on for this. But I think we started talking about this. Uh, what was the conference we were at?
That was Sequel Saturday Denver, although I cannot tell
That's
you the
right,
date.
yes.
I don't remember when that was.
September, sometime
That
back in
sounds right.
September. Yeah. And had a chat and figured it would be something fun to do. And do a bit of a live session of actually going through the case study and the scenario and all that. So I'm glad we were able to get this on the books and get this accomplished. Uh, as I can see that it's over onto the right next to you. I see the whole goal piece, but I will say we have a goal today to be able to exactly to get through and to create some cool visuals off of this. I do love the inspirational poster though. It's a nice touch.
If anyone needs more inspirational posters from the 80s, they're all over this house. So you just let me know.
Is there a cat hanging one that says "hang in there"?
I'm sure there is. We don't have that one though.
I, as a small anecdote, I briefly remember for a moment in time in like the late 2000s, at least when I was um, just finishing up my master's, there was a lot of like the anti-motivational posters. So they had things like that, but it would be like gold and something, but just some really silly little anecdote below it on something that's just was completely ridiculous. But that was like a whole thing on the internet for a while. Is a lot. No, they were called demotivational posters. That's right. But it was a whole trend online for a hot minute, and I think I somewhere buried on an old computer. I'm sure I have a folder of those that I'd save because that's what you did with funny memes at back in the days. You saved the images.
So that's the next Workout Wednesday challenge is to create one of those in Power BI.
Right? Some kind of like a rotating marquee of AI generated demotivational posters with Microsoft Copilot.
All right, Megan and Carrie, you hear that? We've got another idea.
Carrie's mentioned that she loves the demotivational, so I guess I'm not the only one that remembers those, which is good. Demotivational Power BI posters. But bringing it back into our conversation, I think there's going to be a few people probably who will be tuning in today or watching the recording who may not be familiar with you. If you want to give a bit of background about yourself.
Oh, sure. Sure. So nice to meet you all. Thanks again for joining. My name's Shannon Lindsay, and I am working currently at Microsoft. I just switched roles. I'm now working on the Power BI team, which is like a dream come true. My background is in global public health, and I started this whole journey starting with Power Query, kind of before Power BI was a thing, and then moving into Power BI. I started that while I was working in nonprofit with Stephanie Bruno, who also is on the call, and she is
Mhm.
my um, technology bestie and my sister witch. We are data witches.
I like the term. Do you have a coven?
We do, of course.
Okay. Yeah, like you have to, right? Like any well-respected witch would have at least one or more covens. Okay.
Yes, of course.
And the how long now? Like, or better said, how long and how many workout Wednesdays have you done at this point?
That is a great question. Maybe Megan and Carrie can help in the chat. Workout Wednesday started back in 2021, and it was started, well, Workout Wednesday Power BI edition, I should say. So, Workout Wednesday has been going for many, many years. It was an initiative started by the Tableau community, and
Hmm.
we were able to join them with Power BI in 2021. That was started by our friend Spencer Bauke. He is no longer involved, but Megan, Carrie, and I are now have now taken the, what do you call it? The wand?
The
The
the pass the torch.
Yes, the torch. We
Yes.
have now, so we are now going strong. The three of us have been working on this for a few years together now. So we're in year 4. There are loads of challenges on the website. So if anyone wants to practice just building Power BI reports and potentially building reports that you can use in some kind of a public portfolio, this is a great way to go because we provide you with the data that you need, we
Hmm.
provide you with a final version, and then we also provide you with kind of the steps that you need to do to complete the challenge.
And I think i- in a large sense, I can imagine that you've been given a lot of new tools to start to be even more creative with this, with all the stuff that Miguel and the core visuals team, that myself, Carrie, who's in the chat, and a few others have been able to participate with and kind of help evolve. But we're getting all these new visuals now, or updates to the visuals, which makes for a lot more robust ways to. I don't like the term hack because any solution really should be something that should be deployable to like production or actual enterprise reports, but the ways to upgrade and creatively tweak all the stuff that we have. I know we got that new erode versus explode option for all the core visuals that just came out in December and a bunch of other stuff, but it is exciting that we're getting a lot more native ways to do this rather than having to go to the custom visual route, which Deneb and all those others are amazing, but we want those to be used when they absolutely have to, not necessarily uh, the default for a lot of custom special visuals versus the native ones. So it's nice that we're getting more options to continue to choose how and where to tweak stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because if you look back at some of the older challenges, you may wonder like, "Oh, why did you guys do it that way?" But it's because this technology is evolving and perhaps there wasn't a way to do it back then that there is now. Some of them we revisit like I think we did a challenge when the new slicer came out. We've done, new card visuals. We've done all sorts of
Oh
things.
yeah,
So
and
yeah, so we're trying
there
to
are
evolve as the technology does.
every once in a while I get reminded of like so many comments on a video that I realize I have to delete because it's 2 or 3 years old and it's a popular video on YouTube, and I'm like, oh, this practice is now something that would actually probably be the wrong thing to do. Oh, with like a sad heart, yeah, you have to get rid of it. Or at least with a blog post, you can edit it. It's still I'm still sad to this day that there's no way to replace a video that's been uploaded to YouTube. Like I would love to make an edit to something, to at least a few videos, and either redo a small part, but no, you have to start from scratch. It has to get a new viewer count and all that. And it's always bugged me that there's not a way to just to provide some incremental updates to things as technology changes, but still keep the lineage of the 40,000 views that something might have
Yeah.
gotten. Yeah,
Can anyone
but
in the
yeah.
comments get on the horn with the people at YouTube and make that happen?
Right? I'm sure there's got to be some legal reason or something where that could be abused, maybe if somebody actually had privileges of that. But as a content creator, that's always been one of the crappy parts. Or you upload something and then like a month later, you realize there's one small mistake that you made. You got to delete and and re-upload. There's no way to make tiny edits. But I think with that, if you want, why don't we talk a little bit about what we are going to get into today, if you're ready for that?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I am going to share my screen perhaps
Mm, yeah,
and just
absolutely.
talk. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to point out, like, for folks that are brand new to Workout Wednesday, this is the website. It's workout-wednesday.com. You can find all of these links in the description. So if anyone needs them, they're here. And you can see we now have a number of different visualization platforms that are represented in Workout Wednesday, which is really cool. So you have an opportunity to learn anything that you want or need. And the inspiration for today's challenge, actually, Reed and I put our heads together and we thought, like what would be a cool challenge to do? So Reed went back through the
Hmm.
different older challenges. And Reed, do you want to mention why you picked this challenge?
Yeah, so in general, what I really like to do is find things that creatively use the matrix table. It's something that I think can very much be leveraged as a visualization. I've seen lots of fun techniques. When you create the grid, you do something that breaks out by both columns and rows. I've a few years ago with my Google Analytics report had a really fun way to make a heat map that was by hour of day, day of week to help show patterns and distributions. But I think there's a lot of ways to turn a table into a visual, especially with this native visual. So when I saw that and the color pattern and distribution, I just really liked because essentially this a version of a heat map. So that's one of the reasons that I went with this one. And also because we could use native visuals, which is what I was trying to lean towards rather than going the complete custom route for this one versus upgrading what is built and available out of the box from Power BI.
Cool. Yes, I'm also a huge fan of using native visuals, mostly because I'm just not as strong in any of the custom visuals. That's what Megan and Carrie are here for. Okay, so I'm going to jump into what this week's challenge looks like. So we are building a customer lifetime value matrix, which is something that I was unfamiliar with. Has anyone in the comments built one of these before?
And I'll see if anybody drops something like that into there. I also made, just to mention, I made a couple people a moderator. I know there's probably a couple of opportunities to maybe share links, and YouTube's very restrict on letting people do that unless you are one. So they're give people a few degrees of freedom now. Scott has not built one. I'm getting a lot of nopes, but no yeses so far.
Okay, sweet. Well, I had not built one of these either. This was new to me, but fortunately, my sister witch, Steph, has built one of these before. So this is what we're going to end up with. We are looking at essentially how valuable customers are to an organization. This apparently is something that's really common in marketing. I've never worked in marketing, so I do not know, but I'm learning a little bit as we go. So something that you'll see that's unique about this is we're looking at the acquisition quarter. So we're looking at we determined that by looking at the customer's first order, essentially. That's when they were
Mhm.
acquired. And then we're looking at the quarters since acquisition and how much total cumulatively they have spent as a cohort of new customers, essentially. So we had to calculate the new customers, we had to calculate when they were acquired, and then the value over time in the quarters since acquisition.
Mhm.
So, with that being said, the data, if anyone is interested in building this, we have this link in the chat as well. You can find the data on data.world. This is completely free, but you do have to sign up for it. And then there is a connector in Power BI to data.world. So what you'll do is you'll go to data.world, you'll bring in the data into Power BI, or you could also, I suppose, download it in a CSV and upload it to Power BI, whichever you prefer. But I think I'll go ahead if you feel like I've set the stage well enough, I'll go
Mhm.
ahead and jump into Power BI Desktop.
Yep, please do. And just drop a couple of those links into the chat for everyone.
Cool. Thank you so much. All right, so real quick, just to mention, I talked about the data.world connector here in Power BI. We're not going to connect today, but I just want to show you. There's this data.world. It's been in beta for forever. Who knows if and when that will come out, but there is a native connector here. And then what you do is you just put the username of the person who posted it and then the name of the data set. So that piece of the puzzle is pretty straightforward. What I want to do now is just jump into Power Query and talk through a few of the transformations that we did. We're not going to go through the whole thing step by step because it's a little bit complex, and I just don't know if we're going to have time for that today. So you'll notice on the blog post, and I'm going to just jump back to that really quickly, we did provide a starter file. And what you're going to find in there is just the pre-built data model, which is where we're starting from in this build today. So if you want to follow along with what we're doing, you could just grab that starter file and pull it down. With that being said, I'm going to jump into Power Query and talk through a few of the transformations. And Reed, if there are any questions or comments in the chat, please go ahead and raise them.
Mhm.
One other
Absolutely.
thing I wanted to mention, as Steph and I were working on building this out, we did notice, and Reed, you mentioned this word earlier, it does feel a little bit hacky. There were a few interesting things that we had to do to make it work. So if folks have a better suggestion of how we could do it, I'd love to hear that. All right, so I'm just going to show you a few of the tables that we pulled in and B created so that we were able to build this visualization. So the first table that we have here, this is the data straight from data.world. And as you can see here, it's got a bunch of columns, many more than we need. Um, but what we needed to do with this is we needed to get into this table. We needed to understand the when the customer was first acquired. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we got that from the order date. What we ended up doing was a cool little trick that Steph has blogged about, and the link to her blog post is also in the description. And this is something that we actually originally found from Imka Feldman online. So, like Power BI Inception, learning from learning from learning.
Yep.
Um, but what we did here is we grouped all of the rows, and then we were able to essentially rank the customers based on when their first order was, starting at 1, going in increments of 1. And I'm not going to go through this whole, syntax, but Steph has a complete blog post on how to do it. So what we ended up with in this table is we ended up with a few custom columns here. So we're looking at the order sort. So that's the first one that we created. We're looking at the order quarter. So when their first, second, third order was. We're looking at their acquisition quarter, and then we just have a sort column here. So this was a little bit of the gymnastics that we had to do with this table. Speaking of gymnastics, a couple other things I wanted to point out here. One thing that I always do in every report that I work on, and ordinarily I personally am creating reports that don't come from some sort of enterprise system where there's a date table that already exists. So I really love this syntax, and I just want to go into the advanced editor real quick to point this out. I love to create my date table using, there was a blog post, I don't even know how many years ago, from Matt Allington, where he talks about how to create this M date table. And I use this in
Mm-hmm.
almost every single report. I love it. I will shout it to the rooftops, and huge credit to Matt for sharing that with us. So I created this date table, and we didn't end up using it in the visualization, but we did use it to create a disconnected quarter table that we will use in our visualization. So now I'm going to talk through that. So we've got our date table here. And in this table, it has all the things that a traditional date or calendar table would have, but we're really only using from here this quarter year and this quarter sort so that we can, appropriately sort things. From here, we made a little quarters table. And in this quarters table, we just simply referenced our date table. Just if anyone in the chat wants to talk about the difference between duplicating a query and referencing a query, that would be awesome. I think it's a great topic to talk about. But Reed, please stop me because I tend to go down these rabbit holes that are not super relevant.
My favorite analogy, just for that, is it's like it's like a file on your computer. Do you right click and create a shortcut to that file, or do you right click, copy it, and paste it into another folder?
That's a great analogy. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So with our shortcut, using that analogy, with our shortcut that we would have created from another file by referencing the date table, we then keep just the columns we need. We do a little bit more magic, where we are grouping and adding additional, well, not grouping yet. We're adding more quarters. We then group. We do the exact same trick here, but here we're just starting the index, essentially, or the rank at 0 rather than 1. And then what we end up with here is a quarter table that we are going to use in our visual. One other thing I want to point out here is that you may notice in the original visual, and I'm just going to jump here. This is not the original, but it's our take of it. We have this new customers column here that is in the same field as our quarters since acquisition. So because of that, we had to do something a little bit interesting here, and that is we had to say, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom here, if the quarters since we acquired the customer. If we want that to be in the new customers, this is not sounding like it's making sense, but stay with me. Um, we assigned them a value of -1. And you'll see how we use that in a measure in the visual so that we can then display these new customers on in the same field as the quarter since acquisition. So with that being said, that's kind of what we're working with our data model. So really the only tables that we're going to be using in our visual are the Superstore table, which realistically I probably should have removed a bunch of the columns that we're not using, and then the quarters table. I want to just show you quickly, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to show you quickly just what our data model looks like. And what we have here is our Superstore table and our date table, which are related on the order date column. And then we have our disconnected table here, which disconnected tables for me kind of feel like magic. I'm not sure how many people normally use these or even how many use cases there are, but every time I use them, I am always really like, wow, that is the coolest thing.
It's actually one thing that I even I like to organize a bit with they're called groups, even though that the icon is a folder in Power Query. But I'll usually have like my loaded data load to the model section, and it's my fact tables, my dimension tables, and I'll either call them disconnected tables, orphaned tables, or island tables. All three of them describe the fact that they're just on their own. But it's as you mentioned, things like this that can be referenced in measures. It's before we had field parameters, that was the measure switch tables you'd have, but it's all the stuff that basically would usually be driven by either slicers or by a measure that is just figuring out what categorical label they're happen to be displayed at the time.
I really like island table. It's currently snowing outside, so I'm thinking about, mentally transporting myself to a tropical island.
It's the least depressing of all the three. Orphaned tables sounds sad.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Okay. All right. So with that, I think we're done talking about the data model. Again, please go ahead and download that starter file. Take a look at what we've done. And I truly welcome people. If you find a better, more efficient way, I'm sure there is one or many, feel free to update this and post it on social or reach out to me and we can get the starter file updated on the Workout Wednesday site.
Yep.
All right, so now we are just going to build a matrix visual, which is, I don't know, one of the most simple visuals to build. And again, oh, you know what? Before we build our table, we have to create some measures. So let me back myself up. The first measure that we need to create is this customer lifetime value measure. And as this measure was being created, I did a number of different things. First, I tried creating it on my own using the guidance that Anne gave in her original blog post. I did not succeed. I then tried to use, what was I using? Copilot or Bing Chat to try to figure out what I was doing with the measures. I still did not succeed. Then once I reached out to Steph, she helped me figure out just these really simple variables and the formula that we needed to calculate our customer lifetime value, which is essentially just the new customers, the number of new customers divided by the total sales for that new customer cohort.
Yeah.
So it's actually a pretty simple calculation. It just took my brain a long time to figure it out. And I will say, the data modeling that we did by including additional columns using Power Query in our Superstore table, so in our fact table, that made the DAX a lot easier. So I guess that's just another lesson in DAX is really freaking hard if your data model is not set up appropriately.
It is a aggregation tool, not a transformation tool.
I like that.
Yeah. It's like if you need to transform, that is upstream in Power Query or SQL in a view or whatever it needs to be. Yep.
And one thing I want to point out here, just related to this measure and how we worked it out, as Reed and I were going through this measure in preparation for the live stream, he was looking at the formatting that we did down here in our return statement. And Reed, will you talk us through kind of what I did here and what a potentially better way to do this might be?
Yeah, so I mean, until June, July of last year, and I'll pop us a little bit bigger while I'm talking about this. The We didn't really have much options when it came to having different format strings in a table. Like you could either hard code it as text. You can see the format type is set to text. And this is also a common issue that people have with financial statements, where you want like a percentage row or other stuff like that, and often like P&L or FP&A reports. So you'd either hard code it like this. You could also go to calculation groups, and you could do some fancy format strings, but that you're now getting into like the intermediate to advanced territory for a lot of others. But as of June of last year, we got the new dynamic format strings. Might have even been May, but it allows you to take any measure, and you could basically write a DAX formula to say if this then that, and just you can provide it any number of these. So I actually just right before we did this, I had us update this measure into a version 2. So this one, we can see that the measure down at the bottom, it's still returning the values, but it's unformatted. So this is still a number data type, and if you show the format drop down, not that one, the actual format at the top. So yeah, just to show that. So as soon as you go from general and you set it to dynamic, you'll get an extra pop-up over on the left, which gives you a choice to go to your format string. So it's doing identically what a calculation group has been able to do for years, but it's at the single measure level. And then in here, we basically reproduced the code, but instead of actually returning a formatted number, it returns the two different format strings, but that is the format layer, which means that you can keep the number as a number, and you can additionally add the layered format logic to this. So I just like that they brought it to the UI built into Power BI, rather than needing to use Tabular Editor or other stuff to make calculation groups. So it's a pretty easy update. You kind of just copy and paste and split apart your measure to have layers, the formatted DAX code to do the format string here, and then the regular measure. But if you wanted to use data bars or sorting or anything else that needs to sort by numbers in the table, all of that is kept. So it's one of my favorite features to come out. I really like dynamic format strings, and I've honestly gone back at this point to dozens of client models, and give me like 30 minutes, and you can go through and pretty quickly kind of swap and split apart all of these old blocks of code that you used to have, where you would have to hard code things as text in like historical reports. So it's a nice feature and a pretty easy update if you want to go back and update your work for that stuff. But yeah.
It is very cool. Thank you. So I just learned something new. One additional thing that I want to just note is you'll notice here that I have a separate measure here where I created a CLTV numeric for formatting measure, because when you're going to do my brain is not working. When you're going to format your visuals, I was trying to format the background to be that beautiful gradient. You cannot base it on a field if the field is text. It has to be numeric. So I created this separate numeric, measure, but I didn't actually need to do that. I could have just used the dynamic formatting. So that's super cool, Reed. Thank you.
Absolutely.
One other thing I do want to point out, and I do need this separate measure just for now, is I did need to set the formatting so that our new customer column remains with a white background, and then we get the gradient shading in the rest of the matrix. So I would have needed an additional measure at some point, which is what I did here, but the dynamic formatting would have solved my numeric challenge. All right, so with that, we can go ahead and start building, because we only need a few fields for our matrix. Are there any questions or anything in the chat that we want to take before we start building?
Lots of great discussions, nothing specific. So I'll also just prompt again. I have a little sticky comment, but if you do have a specific question for Shannon or myself, start it with a Q and drop it into there, and we can answer it from there. But I think We have a lot of good experts in the chat, which is perfect for dropping regular links to a lot of related content, which has been fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start building. So I am going to drop my quarter year into the values pane, and this is our acquisition quarter. This is the first quarter when our folks were acquired. I'm just going to start with the default formatting, although I will go ahead and bump up the font size because that is, quite frankly, unreadable. All right, so we are starting with quarter year. We then need to get our customer lifetime value in here. And then the other thing that we're going to need is our quarters since. And what you will see here, this is looking a little funky as a table, is remember in the display, we created, in our disconnected quarters table, we created a value for new customers, along with a value for the quarters since they were acquired. So that's why this looks a little funky at the moment. So for anyone that's new to building anything in Power BI, one thing that's a little bit tricky to wrap your head around at first, at least it was for me, is the fact that when you're creating measures, they aren't surfaced anywhere. You can't actually see what you've done unless you plot it on the canvas. So because of that, I always start everything with a table. And I don't know if anyone else does that, but I feel like that is a really easy way to get started so that you can see what it is you're actually doing and validate that your measures are what you expect them to be.
Very much, I would say historically, the table is a great way to start with that, and just as a nod to it's in preview still, but the new query view is the other really useful way to start writing those out. And I'm having to reteach myself like 7 years of habit to use that, but I do like that they are providing an easier way to debug out your measures as you write them. But you have to get more familiar with actually using summarized columns and a few other things to build your table. But I do think it's almost like an encouragement to learn DAX a little bit more if you're actually going to be doing it on a regular basis. But I'm happy they finally added a feature to easily just display out your calculations before you finally put them into your final visual.
Yeah, definitely. And just so folks know, the version that I have open on my machine right now for this challenge is actually the November build. So you cannot see the DAX query view, or is it a preview setting in November?
I think it's a preview setting in November. It just has to be turned on.
Okay, so let's just look at that really quick to show folks how to do that. If you go to your options and settings,
mm-hmm. It always takes a minute. There you
go. And then we go to preview features, DAX query view. Yep. Here it is. Mm-hmm. Now, in order for me to enable this, it's going to want me to restart Power BI and mess with that. But if you do turn on this DAX query view here, you will see it appear over here just beneath the model view. So it just becomes an additional view for you to take a look at. Okay, so with that being said, let's turn this table into a matrix and see if our fields go where we want them to go. Let's see if I remember how to use Power BI. Okay, that is magic. I just clicked one button and it's looking very similar to how I want it to look. So I'm pretty happy with this from the jump. A couple of things to notice, and this is like a big part of what we do regularly in Workout Wednesday and why we do it. The default formatting in any tool, whether you're in Word or Excel or Power BI, the default formatting is not sufficient in order to build things that are useful for real human beings. So we need to spend some time and format this in a way that A, is readable, and that B, can be used by anyone. So making sure that things like tab order are set appropriately, making sure that our color contrast is set appropriately, things like that. So just a heads up, formatting always takes the most time, but I would argue it's maybe the most important.
And I dropped just a quick link to the theme generator that Mike Carlo at PowerBI.tips has built. It is It's the best tool for design, and it's not just a theme generator. Everything from the uh, I want my header icons turned off for slicers to what borders are like any single setting that you can basically imagine that is in the format pane for any object or visual can be configured to be defaulted to a certain thing. So it took me hours to build mine to all the right defaults, but it saves you a ton of time. So I would recommend for anybody who wants to, if you constantly, every time you build a new report, you change like you want your row height or the grid padding on your matrix table to be 10 instead of 7. All that can be set in there, and it you can use the theme going forward in any of your reports. So it's always a nudge for people to save yourself some time and build yourself a default theme.
That is a great tip. Especially, I mean, if you're building reports at work, that's another good way to come up with a, company theme. So everything looks
Mm-hmm.
standardized across your org or across your company. So that's a great tip. I love that tool. One
Oh
other
yeah.
just quick note as I'm building, I often will just go to these default themes that are just out of the box. I like Accessible Orchid the best, which is this one. Um, but these themes have been designed with appropriate color contrast in mind. One thing that you will note is that in this case, it didn't do anything to this font size. So we still have some work that we have to do, but there are things you can use outside of the box if you're not interested in creating your own theme. All right, so let's keep formatting this, and I don't think this is going to take us much time at all. But the first thing that we need to do is get these totals out of here. Because we don't
Yep.
need them, they don't add anything. So I am going to go ahead and just turn off both the row and the column subtotals.
And a fun
And just,
little no, just note on that is there actually can be a pretty high performance cost sometimes on a lot of the subtotals that are in a table or matrix visual that can massively slow down something, especially depending on how the DAX is written and your model is shaped. So it's always an encouragement if you see that there's any values that are repeating 5 levels up in a hierarchy, there's a good chance you can turn off at least a few of those levels between there and likely increase the performance of your visual. So subtotals and totals should only be on if you need them, even though they are on by default. So like just as it's a performance FYI.
that's a great point. Is there anywhere programmatically that you can turn them off?
You can do under row subtotals if you have a hierarchy. There is a way to turn off level by level, but programmatically in terms of detection of maybe the data, not really. And again, some of these defaults can also be set up in the themes generator. If you want them off by default and turn them on only when you want them, you can at least set that. But here, at least you can turn off row by row. So if you know that, like if you have 8 levels in your hierarchy, levels 1, 4, and 8 makes sense to have subtotals, you can turn it on for just those, skip the rest. That way you don't end up with a bunch of extra rows of repeating values because the subtotal is repeating, between these 3 levels or anything like that.
Very cool. That's awesome. I didn't know that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Also, I'm seeing some chat about a tool to make sure that your reports are accessible. So I just want to hype that
Mm.
up a bit. And we have Megan and Stephanie both in the chat.
Yeah.
Megan is our OG accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
What's the right genius? Megan knows all about accessibility and has taught many of us. And what Stephanie did is she took some of Megan's guidelines and she built an actual tool where you can check, does your Power BI report have appropriate tab order? So folks, tab order means, just using tab on your keyboard. If you're using a screen reader or things aren't accessible to you, if the tab order is set correctly, it'll go through the different visuals in the correct order. So Steph's tool will tell you if your report does that. It will also tell you if your visuals have alt text. This is a big one that I know myself I often miss. And if you have alt text set up for each of your visuals. And then her tool also goes into, is the color contrast appropriate? Meaning, does it adhere to the WCAG guidelines? And Megan and Steph, feel free to jump in the chat if I missed anything there.
Yeah, they're throwing a couple of links into there, but yeah, similar to as what you just said. Like the first person that I was ever aware of related to Power BI was Megan. writing and blogging about this earlier than I think most other people. So it's always appreciated when there's someone who, what's the phrase, the rising waters raise all ships situation. So somewhat of a trendsetter for that.
Yes, thank you, Megan. And I can also just put a little plug in. We're also working to make Power BI more accessible for creators, report builders. That's something I'm now working on. So hopefully we'll have more improvements coming in that space too. All right, so jumping back into our visual and doing all of the tinkering that we need to do to format. The first thing that I almost always do in matrix visuals is I use this style presets button and I just turn this to none. The one thing that it cannot get rid of are the right border on the rows and the bottom border on the column.
Row headers and scroll up to the top. Go to grid. Go to border.
Border.
Change that color to white.
Look at that.
There you go.
Hot tip. I'm learning so much today.
I will say the matrix table does have the most settings of any native visual. So it is one small silver line that I really appreciate that they added that search box that's at the top right there a few years ago. Because God, just trying to go through and find something sometimes. So like just looking for color and you see all the locations that color will actually show up in, which can be really helpful of like what colors can I change and where. So that's always been where I go on a hunt if I need to find something or just see what's available.
Excellent call out. Search bars are my best friend. I use them in everything. I mean, especially the more advanced the software gets or the more customizable it gets, there are so many settings that are so buried in here. So this is a great way to start. All right, so from here, really the last step that we need to do to finish this out, besides tinkering with font size and maybe adjusting the canvas size, if that's something we decide we need to do, is we need to just get our conditional formatting in here. That's the word I was looking for earlier that I couldn't find. Get our conditional formatting in here. So we're going to go ahead and just use the conditional formatting here in the cell elements. We're going to apply this to our CL customer lifetime value column. And we're going to go ahead and change both the background color and the font color. If we look in our visual here, as the background color gets darker, the font color becomes white just for readability purposes. And I do know there's still room for improvement in the color contrast here, so I can continue to work on that. But for the purposes of today, let's go ahead and get this set up. So we're going to turn the background color on, and we are going to format the format style is going to be gradient. We are going to base this on the field. As you can see, I've got a lot of things I was playing around with in here. We're going to base this on our field, the CLTV numeric for formatting. So this one is the one that is a number and also includes the blank formatting for our number of customers. We're then going to take our settings here. Our lowest value, I created just a custom value for this and I set it at 20. You can set this at whatever you want. I also took the original color palette that Ann Jackson used in her challenge, and I found the hex values of those actually using the color contrast analyzer. There are also inbuilt tools, Microsoft tools that you can use to find hex colors, but I love the color contrast analyzer. I try to have it open when I build reports. So I grabbed the hex values from here and I'm just going to pop them into the conditional formatting. One other just fun tip here, if people are not yet using the clipboard history, is that what it's called? I love this feature.
What's the hotkey for that again?
It is Windows V.
Yep, there it is. I would say that plus my other favorite thing that's been around since Windows 8 maybe is the power toys.
Yes.
So like the color picker, like there's dozens of things for that, but there's so many cool like upgraded Windows features that come with power toys, and it's made by Microsoft, which is nice.
Yes, I actually have to admit I haven't downloaded or used that, so maybe it's time.
Like 1000%. There's so many nice features to Power Toys. It is amazing.
Awesome. Okay, it's on my list of things to check out. All right, so the last thing we have to do here, going back into our conditional formatting, is to make sure that we set this. How should we format the empty values? These are our blanks. And I'm going to set that to don't format. And the reason is we don't want the new customers column and then any of our blanks in the matrix to be this purple color. We want them to be white. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, and we are almost there. Really important to point out that we have to adjust our font color because this is completely unreadable, really, to anyone at this point. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go back in and we're going to adjust our font color. We're going to, again, set this as a rule. We're going to base it on the same field. And we're going to just say, and this is where I can play around with this a lot more, but I just picked a value looking at the values in my matrix. This is not dynamic, so just keep that in mind. But I said if the value were equal to this number and less than, and then I just picked a giant number here. Hacky, probably not the best way to do this. Then set it to white.
Yeah, I generally just hold down 9 until I'm
Oh,
comfortable.
really?
Yeah, I just spam 9, like, get 20 or 30 of them there. Just have a number so absurdly high that it will never break.
I find I struggle with having to put a value in that field. I don't know if anybody else does, but
Can
it
you
always
actually go? Can you go
me.
back to that for just a quick sec?
Yeah.
Let's see. Delete the 10,000 entirely.
Okay. And what happens actually?
There you go. Yeah, that should work. Like there's no max.
Oh, so you don't have to set it.
Yeah. So in the scenarios where there isn't there is not actual ceiling, you just want it to, basically, if you want it to be greater than or equal to something but not less, you only want one of those two conditions. It's really unintuitive in the interface, but leaving it empty is how you do that. Other interfaces, you would actually be able to get rid of that second parameter entirely, but if you leave it blank, it has a infinite ceiling. It's just, will simply never have a limit that it will hit.
Ah, fantastic. I'm learning so many things today. Thank you, Reed.
Yeah, like that. I've had to point that out in a lot of trainings because just nobody will intuitively know that. It's the conditional formatting is not the best interface in Power BI.
Awesome. Thank you. That's super helpful. All right. So with that being said, we're basically done building out this week's challenge. So of course, we're going to want to add a title and, anything else that you feel like you need to add on this page. I am quickly actually going to just show the selection pane so that we can see how to set the tab order. There's only one visual on this page, so this really isn't very helpful at the current moment. But if you want to make sure that your tab order is set appropriately, or you want to mess with your layer order, this is going to be the place to do that. And that's it. So this week's challenge, we actually spent I spent a lot more time shaping the data. And then the visual was pretty straightforward. We had to make sure that we had our, not showing any conditional formatting for where the fields, the values are blank. But other than that, it was just some fairly simple conditional formatting with a matrix. And so I think this is a nice example of how you can use the core visuals that exist within Power BI, these ones right here, and just customize them a little bit for a pretty big impact.
And this actually is an application of one of my favorite little techniques. Oddly, like I wish I could take credit for kind of thinking about the dynamic font formatting, but it was through actually working on the InfoRiver tool years ago when I was doing some testing for them, and they had this. They actually have it built in. There's a toggle which is auto font formatting if you apply background colors. It's just built into the tool. Like that's clever because it a limitation is you can't go too dark, otherwise the front font or the numbers become unreadable because it blends in too much. So switching from black to white as the shades go from light to dark, and layering them is one of my favorite things to teach as an upgrade for people who do data bars or background colors like this, because you get a much wider gradient choice list when you do that.
Yeah, Absolutely. And we do have a challenge. I think it's back from 2021. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but it was one of David Eldersveld's first few challenges where we did, I think it was either a matrix or a table, and we did something similar to this, but a bit more straightforward. So if you're looking for something where the DAX is going to be a little bit more straightforward and you don't want to have to deal with anything custom, I would say check out David's 2021 challenge related to the customizing the color of the font.
I've leveraged many of his things over the years. Like 5, 6 years ago, the first SVG chart that I built, I basically built the OKViz sparkline. I added a bunch of extra stuff, but I took his initial little sparkline thing. I added some curves and some min and max colors, shading, and all that. But I lifted and shifted his initial code that he had built from 2016, 2017. He's done a lot of really fun visual upgrades and some clever DAX writing for sure.
Yes. Yeah, another one of his that I particularly loved was back in 2021, and I'm just going to jump over to it because why not? Was where we customized formatting and we put a point where the highest value was using DAX. And I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom here. It's somewhere here. But yeah, David was one of our original contributors in year one.
Nice.
I
love the
also really
backpack
like
picture.
Here it is. Can you highlight values using DAX? This is the one I was thinking of David's. It's really cool. So 2021 week 17. Very cool. All right, so I guess that's it for the challenge itself. Are there any questions or things folks wanted to raise that we should be talking about that we've missed?
Put a couple hearts on the screen. Scott was just wondering if we have a hard stop at 10:30 exactly. No, we can continue to chat and hang out as long as there's questions in here. Just, yeah, in general, lots of good chatter. People learning little factoids and things along the way as we've walked through some of the stuff. Quite a few people didn't know about the being able to remove a physical limit for the conditional formatting. I'll just remind people again, if there is any remaining questions that either of us can answer or discussion points that we can talk about as we're starting to wrap up, feel free to drop them into the chat. But otherwise, I've enjoyed some of the lively discussions that have been over there, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces, some of whom I'm sure I will be seeing in 6 weeks, 5 weeks at the MVP Summit. Okay, I got a good one from Mark. Just as a prompt, don't forget to include the queue, but I'll grab this because it helps me to track them on my piece. So here we go. I'll pop this up onto the screen. Mark wants to know, what's your favorite way to create an auto calendar?
All right, so I will start off by saying for anyone else that comes from the Excel world, there is a feature in Power Query and Excel where it will create a date table for you. So I know a lot of people, particularly somebody that I work with regularly, he's always hounding me like, why does that not exist in Power BI? When is that coming? But there are a few different ways to create a calendar table. I will just mention, I have already mentioned, my favorite way is to do it in Power Query. What's your favorite way, Reed?
Well, there are a couple of methods. Power Query is great, but if you are putting that into a new workbook, then you have a lot of extra steps to create. I like to have folders between like my fiscal, my index or offset columns. Like you have to create the hierarchies again. You have to apply your sort. So there's a lot of extra steps unless you're going to programmatically go through some scripts in Tabular Editor or other stuff. There are some C# scripts that can do that for you using Tabular Editor, which will create a Power Query to generate all of that. But one of the easiest ways for like the magic big red easy button, I'd say, is the Bravo tool from SQL BI. Does pop it in, and it creates technically 2 calendar tables. The first one has the giant script. The second one will reference it because otherwise, I think a lot of us know the annoyance when you click a long measure or any code, it just fills up your whole screen. So that's the best way that I've seen to get it in through DAX. But in a perfect world, I like Power Query. I already have a template created. So I have never, it has been years since I have actually created a brand new Power BI desktop file. I have a file that has already has a measures table in it. It already has a calendar table. It already has the theme that's been added into there. So it's a starter kit that has everything pre-built. And there's a couple parameters that I change. Maybe it's a template file or something. But either way, it's my starter kit that has all of the universal items already needed, ready to go. And then I add the rest of my stuff. So that's how I personally recommend most people is have your starter file ready to go with the stuff built in as you need to, and then that can just be used across the company.
I love that tip. That is such a great tip. I always have to dig back into an old file and then pull out the Power Query. Um, Jeroen also mentioned doing it in a data flow, which is another great use case, especially if you're doing it in an organization and you want everybody to have the
Mhm.
same exact calendar
Yes,
table.
exactly. I mean, these days now you can stick it in your in the warehouse or in a lake house up in Fabric. But yes, Matthew wrote Roche's maxim: as far
Push
upstream
it up.
as possible, downstream as necessary. Yeah, like that also applies here. So if you do have any of these kind of master dimension tables that are agnostic to the model and can be used across any semantic model, likely get them upstream somewhere. A lot of people keep it in SQL. Quite a few companies will just have a date table already to go. The only other thing I might mention on it is I love the idea of like offset or index columns.
Yeah.
So those are, in a lot of ways, those are so much easier to use to provide relative date filters for people than even using the built-in date functions, which requires sometimes fancier modeling. So they're one of my favorite items. I'm curious actually if there's an easy link that I can provide. Date offsets Power BI. I'm sure it's at least a few. Okay, here we go. Obvious, yeah, that's where I learned it from years ago, back when I used to work with him. But he has a great YouTube video on those, and it all the way back from 2017. So it's been a minute.
The
Really cool
2017 was
feature.
just last year, Reed. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Exactly. COVID years don't count. This extra gray. This never showed up. Brilliant. Let
Awesome.
me actually, now that we're here, I'm going to pop back to our main screen.
Okay,
I don't
cool.
think there's any other questions, so I think we can use that to probably wrap up. But no, Shannon, this has been great. I think it was fun to kind of build all this out together, and it was a very fun and interactive session for sure. And we should definitely do another workout Wednesday, Friday at some point again.
That sounds awesome. I'd love that.
Mhm.
And I also want to just put in a plug for everyone that's on the line.
Please.
We're always looking for guest contributors for Workout Wednesday. I know there are a couple of folks that are in the chat that have already submitted for this year. So we will put out another call for guest contributors. We've now been coming up with ideas for 4 years, so we're starting to run out of ideas, with the exception of new things that get built in the product. So if anyone is interested in contributing, please feel free to reach out to myself, Megan, or Carrie.
And there's a lot of all the pertinent links for that are in the description below this video. So feel free to check those out and contact accordingly if you have any fun ideas for this stuff. Excellent. Then with that, Shannon, I'll say thanks for joining on this Friday, and I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see everyone online next week for the next live stream.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Reed, and thanks to everyone
Absolutely.
for the active participation. This was so fun.
100%. Yeah. Cheers, everyone.
All right, bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.